Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, you saw the topic that you were handed, voting during a pandemic. And this is your job. This is your life. Why don't you tell us what the plans are in the state of Connecticut?
Sure. Yes, it's a bit of a moving target these days. There's lots going on, but Connecticut, we've been planning for quite a while already because we saw it coming. So there is a Connecticut plan for safe voting. It's on my website, the entire plan. And it's to do two things. It's to allow people who are afraid of getting COVID to vote by absentee ballot. And that has been enhanced, obviously, by the governor's executive order. So we're trying to facilitate that. But we are also, and just as importantly, trying to make sure that the polling places are safe. And so we're doing, to do both those things, we have a federal grant for about $5 million, and we are going to use it largely at the local level. The two big things we're doing is I'm sure you may have heard, we are mailing absentee ballot applications, very important, not the ballots, the applications, to every active, eligible primary voter. All our plans so far are just for the primary because the governor's executive order is only valid through September 9th. And that is the order that allows anyone, even if they are not sick themselves under the statute, to get an absentee ballot if there is still no vaccine and we're still in a pandemic emergency situation. So that could be renewed possibly if we're still there in the fall, but we don't know yet. So everything I'm saying is really about the primary, and we consider it kind of a test case for the general, except the fact is we will mail the applications for the general election as well. But for the primary, we will not only mail the application, we will mail a stamped self-addressed envelope with it so that people can easily mail it back to town hall. Because we know that many town halls are still closed, some are starting to open, but we did purchase a ballot box in use in all the other states already. Much like a mailbox, it will be mounted by the town in every town so that people can drop off their absentee ballots even if town hall is closed. Many people do that normally if they are voting absentee. And also, but for the safe polling places, this is a big challenge. And part of the challenge is we don't know how many poll workers will want to work on primary day or election day because many of them are elderly. They're over 60. I can say that, I'm over 60. And, so we have a volunteer program. We're working with the governor's office to try to get what I call a new generation of poll workers. We've known this has been a problem coming for many years, actually. And so we need to find a new generation of folks to work at the polls. We're reaching out to colleges. Students may be home looking for something to do that's profitable, worthwhile, and we will pay the towns to hire these extra poll workers if needed. We will provide PPE for every poll worker, every polling place. We will follow all the CDC guidelines, so social distancing and so forth. And if any town wants to change their polling place, we are frankly not encouraging it because confusion results. And also from what we've seen for the last 4 or 5 elections, primary elections that have been held in other states, people are still flooding to the polls. And it's kind of hard to predict. Our job is to figure out somehow what human behavior is going to be in August and then again in November. And so, like I keep telling everyone, and we've had multiple phone calls with registrars and clerks, something like the other day we had a 3-hour marathon conference call where people asked, I don't know, about 100 questions. We answered every one until they were all answered. It's been a lot of communication. We've communicated with the cities and towns. So everyone should know that their town needs to get their safe polling plan into our office in order to be reimbursed for the expenses I'm talking about, which we will reimburse 100%. On top of that, there's a whole cybersecurity thing that people have kind of forgotten about. until recently, where you may have read that both of the national campaigns were hacked. So we're still trying to make sure that our election systems are secure. We have the National Guard going out to work with towns to make sure that they're running the proper software, that they have the proper protections in place, like dual authentication. So we're putting in place a number of cybersecurity matters as well. So we've got our hands full, as you can hear. So far, I think about 100 towns have put in their safe polling plans and requested reimbursement for these various expenses. So we're doing the best we can in a very complicated system. I wouldn't even call it a system. We're the only state now in the country that doesn't operate their elections by county, because we don't really effectively have a county government. And so we're trying to work with 169 towns, multiple different ways of operating on so many levels. It's nothing you could really get your arms around. And, but also a lot of people that have been doing this a long time. And so that's the good news. And it is very dispersed. And we're trying to make sure everybody's prepared, and we're doing everything we can, but really the job is at the local level. And so we hope it all works. Should be very interesting.
Questions?
Thank you. Now, you were submitted 4 questions, and hopefully we'll have time for a few more, because after all, you just told us you could handle 100 questions at a time. But we'll start with the first one. Was Connecticut voters would benefit from an increase in the number of voting days. How can you make that happen?
Do you know how depressing that question is? Let me just tell you. I've been fighting for a decade to get both early voting, which is what more days of voting is called, early voting, and what we call no-fault absentee ballots. And now people are kind of calling it voting by mail. It's been thwarted a number of times. I think that the basic problem is that, well, first of all, it's in our state constitution, and that makes it very difficult to change without a 75% majority in both houses of the General Assembly. And that is increasingly difficult every year. And I'll tell you, this effort on my part started after the storms of 2011 and 2012, Storm Sandy and all that, where suddenly it occurred to everybody, if we had an emergency of that kind, and we hadn't considered COVID or anything like it, that we had very little flexibility in order to be able to let people vote, because the strictures in the state constitution are very specific. You can get absentee ballots in one of 4 ways, and I won't go through the whole thing, but one of them is not if there's a storm and there's no polling places. So that began my effort to get that language out of the state constitution and put it in statute in any way that we could get an agreement on. The rest of the country has already done this. We are so far behind that it's sad, honestly, because we now confront a situation where we don't want people to choose between their health and their vote. And we have no way really to make that happen except by executive order of the governor. And that is not the best way to do things. It's very temporary. It runs out September 9th. So that's the saga of woe. I have tried to pass this many times in various iterations. We actually got it on the ballot in 2014. And I know one of your other questions is, well, what did you do to help that pass? Unfortunately, I couldn't do anything. And I was hoping that groups like the League would come forward and help get the word out about the issue on the ballot. There were a number of reasons it didn't pass, but one of them was I was also on the ballot. So I was really forbidden from making any effort to pass an issue that was on the ballot at the same time I was. So I really couldn't get behind it in any real way. I certainly tried, but I felt like I looked behind me and the army wasn't there, you know what I mean? So it went down, I think, for lack of understanding. The way it was worded was, shall we say, I wouldn't even say confusing. Basically what it said is, should we take this language about your ballot out of the state constitution and let the legislature decide how to do it? Well, you know, the legislature is rarely popular, and people don't seem to realize they make a lot of laws, in fact, all the laws. But I think that made people think, oh, something's being taken away from me, and I don't understand this. In fact, I had people come up to me and say, oh, I voted against that terrible provision that was going to take away my voting rights. I said, well, thanks a lot. All right. So here we are today in exactly the situation I was afraid we'd be in, and we still cannot get it passed. I introduced it again last year in the legislature. The absentee ballot part was the most controversial and therefore got removed, the part about letting people get an absentee ballot anytime they want one, which is done in about 40 states, by the way. And so it came out because there were certain people in the legislature, both Democratic and Republican, by the way, who don't like the idea of absentee ballots. They think it's, you know, fraught with problems, particularly in the cities and so forth. And anyway, it got taken out, but we did pass a measure that will allow early voting. But it did not pass by 75%. Therefore, it has to go back and get voted on by another legislature. They have to pass it by at least 50%. Then it has to go on the ballot. So it won't even be on the ballot until 2022. I have lobbied all the leadership of the Democrats because the Republicans now are blocking everything on elections. You know, I won't say any more about that, but even the Democrats, I have asked them to put a measure on their special session that would be a constitutional amendment to allow for no-fault absentee balloting and early voting. And, you know, try again to get 75%. Maybe in light of the new information about COVID and all the fears that many, many Republican voters have, we could get some Republican votes. I don't know if they're going to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Merrill.
Long answer, sorry, but that's a tough one for me.
No. One more question. You combined a couple of those. Has there been a cost evaluation about how our current system, you know, going to the polls, and how that weighs with mail-in voting? What are the costs and both ways of doing it?
That's probably, quite frankly, the wrong question. For years, we've tried to get a handle on how much our current way of voting, how much it costs. We gave up after we realized that it was impossible to get a real number. Every town does it differently. They pay their registrars and clerks vastly different sums to do the same job. They have very different arrangements for the way they compensate people. Some people get health care benefits, some don't. Some come in one day a month. Some come in every day and have 3 assistants. It doesn't seem to have any consistency across towns. And we had a hard time even figuring out their budgets because they're embedded sometimes in town budgets in ways that you can't really extract it. So it was a very frustrating experience. We finally gave up. The cost of mailing in voting, well, that depends, doesn't it? Mailing in voting, if you do it the way I think we're going to do it, it's much more efficient, obviously, if we're mailing those applications out. And frankly, I support the bill Will Haskell has been trying to pass, which would make that an electronic system. You should be able to just ask for a ballot electronically, would go to your town, and they'd send you a ballot, you know, check you off the list. We don't have that system now. We would need legislative approval to do that. And all these things are tightly regulated and heavily lobbied, and it's so partisan now. I just don't know if we can get anything passed anymore in elections. It's really hard. So I would say if we did it in a more central way, like we are planning to, for example, we're going to mail all the applications out for the primary. That's much less costly than having every town do it, obviously. We get a deal. And the mail house that we're using will also be able to mail out the ballots. So again, you're saving towns a lot of money by doing it centrally. That doesn't mean everybody thinks it's great, because a lot of them like to control those absentee ballots. They want to know when they're going out. But our mail house can also track ballots. They have barcodes. They can do all these newfangled things that local towns can't. So I have to assume it would be vastly more efficient, because it's difficult to imagine anything that would be less efficient than what we have now, because it is wildly inefficient to have every town do all this.
I'm always amazed at how my simple questions come up with all this myriad of answers, because they're problems that I've never ever dreamed of. So obviously I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, no, you're not alone. Whenever anybody, no one really thought much about any of this. We all just trusted our elections went on, and it's always been done that way. And Connecticut's hyper-local with everything. So I think it's just lately that people have started questioning all this, and that's part of the problem.
Well, we've got Denise Merrill, Secretary of the State. We have time for a couple more questions. Does anyone have a question for our Secretary of State?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, Denise, I'm Claudia Copeland.
Hi,
You
Claudia.
said that you would be looking for a new generation of poll workers, which I understand. I'm one of those over 60 people who works the polls. Is that after you have determined who in the current cadre of poll workers is still willing to work? Is this like bringing up a new generation to fill in the blanks as we retire?
Absolutely. This is all up to the registrars who do all the hiring at the local level. So that's why when they send us their plan for this year, they're supposed to tell us if they need more people. And they will ask you first if you want to work the polls. And then if there's a number of people that say no, then they will see if we can help them get new workers. And we will also provide funding for new workers, particularly if they're in addition to the workers they needed. If they're going to, for example, have more polling places, which frankly we're encouraging. Because when you see the disasters that went on in Milwaukee and in Georgia the other day, it happened because we've got to keep people 6 feet apart, and that's a challenge in some of these existing locations.
Denise?
Thank you.
I have a question.
Denise, can I just do one real quick? And this is a really hard one. If the Constitution specifies things and you have an executive order, doesn't the Constitution take priority over the executive order? If that is true, then what happens to the results of the election if the court determines that it was an improper designation of absentee ballots?
Under the law, the executive order still takes precedence, and it, by the way, does not conflict with the state constitution. Interestingly, here's what the state constitution says. It says, a voter may get an absentee ballot due to illness. It's never been tried or tested or defined. The statute says a voter can get an absentee ballot due to his or her illness. So I have argued that the statute is contrary to the state constitution because it's even more restrictive. So that we're working on defining the statute, redefining the statute to include this emergency situation. And I think it will hold up in court.
Yvonne, you had a question?
I have a question too.
Yes.
One moment. Deb.
Yeah. So Denise, one of my old sociology professors at Rice, Bob Stein, is running an effort consulting with the city of Houston to try to figure out ways to make voting, even though they have early voting in Texas, to make voting day of the election safer, make it more likely that poll workers will come. And one of the things that they're advocating, which I don't know how it'll work here, is moving voting locations to, because they also vote in a lot of schools, to move them to larger locations where it's easier to create social distance and to get people through faster, because the theory is that if you can make voting the day of the election feel better for the poll workers, then you won't have what happened in the state that just voted, where people, I'm not going to work, I don't want to get coronavirus.
Absolutely, and we are encouraging and allowing that in towns that request it. So again, it all goes back to the local officials, the clerks and registrars, to decide how they're going to accommodate the CDC guidelines. If they want to use, and I know there's at least one town that is doing this, South Windsor, has asked if they could take 2 of their polling places and maybe more and have them all be in one big school. And it may make sense. So we're evaluating them individually, but we are asking towns, they have to go through us. We have to okay the plan, so.
Okay, Dick Lowenstein, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm Dick Lowenstein. I've been a long-time moderator on the polls. And my expectation is that there'll be fewer people coming to the polls because of the social distancing. Now, one of the things I recall, though, with absentee ballots is they can be recalled by a voter up to 10 a.m. on the day of elections. And I'm wondering how you plan to handle that, and whether the additional expected expense for handling withdrawals could be a town requested reimbursement from the state.
The answer is yes, they can. They can be reimbursed for any cost like that that requires more labor on the part of the town. And that is still the right of the voter to be able to withdraw their ballot, although we're certainly not encouraging it. And bear in mind, this is the primary now. We're not talking yet about the general. None of this is true about the general. The general, we're back to square one unless the legislature acts.
Although, if I think I'm afraid of getting sick, is that illness?
Well, I did do an opinion that defined illness under the statute, not under the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, our opinion does include underlying illnesses that could be dangerous for people who are fearful of COVID. Yes, absolutely. Okay. And I think that also holds up legally.
I think so too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Denise?
So Denise, if all the towns really want to be able to be geared up to send out a bazillion absentee ballots and get the forms and the outside envelopes printed and all that, really can't wait for Lamont to dither around and do something in August. What I know, I am part of several groups that have been lobbying the Big 8 and Lamont to try to get them to include in the special session that's hopefully within the next month. Just all they really have to do is get rid of that his, her in the statute, correct?
Correct, but I don't think that's what they're going to do. I think they're going to mirror his decision, his which is fine too. I mean, it works. I don't think it's as strong as mine was, but no. Whatever. And what he does is he carves out a big exception for a pandemic, no vaccine in this specific instance. And I don't know what else they'll put in there. I'm encouraging them to do more than that and to make it more permanent, but I don't know if they will. There's a lot of resistance, and of course it's a special session, so who knows? But it's a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, and Lamont wanted to just make it over 65, which we all wrote in about because that's a total non-starter.
Well, and also that really is not in the Constitution.
Right.
He likes that idea because there are a number of states that's the way they limit their absentee ballots, Texas being one. Anyone over 65 in Texas can get an absentee ballot, end of story. They also have 30 days of early voting. So every state's a little different. We are the most restrictive state in the country, even behind Alabama and Mississippi. Unbelievable, but that's where we are. And I don't see any movement, and I don't know why. It's completely ridiculous that people would block the idea that people would risk their health to go vote in person. Why would you do that? There's no evidence that it's partisan in any way. As a matter of fact, in Connecticut, the towns with the highest number of voters using absentee ballots are Greenwich, Fairfield, West Hartford, I don't think Westport's on the list, but anyway, mostly it's people who commute and they want to use absentee ballots, and most of them are Republican. So I don't know why the resistance, but it's there ever since President Trump came out and said, oh, if we do voting by mail, no Republican will ever win again. So that just fanned the flames, and now here we are.
Well, Wisconsin, Ari Berman says Wisconsin is going to mail 2.7 million registered voters absentee ballots for November, in spite of their legislature not wanting them to do it.
I think they should. I mean, I think we will mail the applications for the general election, because that is within my authority to mail the applications. There's no problem there at all. And the mail house can do all that mailing you were talking about. I mean, the mail house, the way it's going to work in the primary is we will mail the applications out starting Friday of this week, actually. And people will get them with a stamped self-addressed envelope. It can mail them back. It will explain on the application exactly who can get one. And in this case, it's anyone who wants one, really. They mail it back. The clerk checks them off the list, whatever, and then notifies the mail house it's all done by barcode. It's all done electronically. And the mail house does all the mailing. So it's really a great system, and it's much more efficient. So we'll see. We can't really afford with the federal grant to do stamped self-addressed envelopes, but we can afford to do a mailing of the applications to everyone for the fall. Beyond that, my authority just doesn't extend, unfortunately.
I see that Barbara Udding has a question for us. Barbara?
Barbara, unmute your phone, your computer.
Hi, Denise. Thank you for attending our meeting.
Oh, you're welcome.
I have a question about the polls, and should we want to volunteer at the polls, like Dick was talking about a few minutes ago? I want to know at what level will the state provide PPE protection? In other words, will they provide face shields, 95 masks, all of that? Because I think people need to know, and I would consider volunteering, but I would need to know the level of protection I would have in a public place with high traffic.
And the registrar should have that information for you, but yes, we are providing PPE to the level of the N95 mask. I'm not sure about the shields. That's been more of a question. Some towns have chosen to provide those because they're very expensive. So some towns are providing those for their workers, and I don't think we are, but we're providing gloves, face masks. We're cleaning every facility, both before and after. We have a statewide cleaning company that's going to come in and sterilize everything. So we're doing a lot of that. Some towns are supplementing that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Trying to make sure I can see everybody. Pat Porio, you have a question?
Am I on mute or what?
Nope, you're good, Pat.
You can hear me? I'm wondering about down here. It's nothing to do with, thank you, Denise, so much. It explained a lot of what's going on. But we have 5 chats down here on the screen. Are those people trying to get in that haven't been able to, or?
We have several things happening in chat, which we've talked about.
We covered all of them. Yeah, but one was Barbara letting us know that she was raising her hand. The other one was Jane Eyes thanking us.
Okay.
Marla Cowden wants to sponsor someone to join the league.
That's good.
I'm watching them, but thank you.
Good, thank you.
Jim, are you leaving us? You're on mute. Or do you have a question?
No, first of all, Secretary Merrill, welcome to Westport. This is quite a day. We started the morning with the governor on a Chamber of Commerce ending the day with you. So thank you for being here, at least electronically. And as a Republican who frequently voted absentee ballot back in a prior life, where I'd be out of town or frankly in New York City and couldn't get back home, I've long supported the concept of absentee voting and agree that we need to do better than just the way our ancestors of 200 years ago went about the process. I think we can do that. A question that I started thinking about, in this part of the state, our mail delivery can sometimes take 7 to 10 days because it passes through the Westchester sorting facility for the USPS. And we have that problem within the town already, where people theoretically at least miss deadlines because of that. I can imagine, not getting results, until 2-3 days, maybe after what we would normally consider the official election. I'm sure you've thought about this, but I'm just curious how we would potentially address that problem.
You have pinpointed an enormous problem, Jim, and this is the reason I do not support a total vote by mail solution, because I don't think we've figured out the US Postal Service problem. And as a matter of fact, it's getting worse. We have talked extensively with the Postal Service. We are color coding the mail now. I'm not sure we're doing it for the primary, but we're going to do it for the general so that that'll be identifiable as election mail. But that's exactly what happened in these other cities. When you saw the chaos in Milwaukee and in Georgia, both times it's because people who requested absentee ballots didn't get them in time. That's why we're mailing the applications out this week for a primary that's still months away, even though we had to balance the potential confusion because people are going to get these applications before they're even thinking about primaries. But that's the balance we have to strike. And that's why I keep telling people we have to prepare for everyone to vote absentee and everyone to come to the polling place truthfully, because we don't really know how this is all going to work. It is a big problem. And the federal government is not being helpful. They're taking even more funding away from the Postal Service, but you're right, we've dealt with that problem with the mail going from Fairfield County to Westchester and back again. And all we can do is mount a significant, I hope, public campaign to get people, if you're going to vote absentee, get those ballots back as fast as you can. And, the ballots will be ready 45 days before every election, as they have to be under federal law. But it's a huge problem. You're right.
Thank you.
Didn't you mention something about ballot boxes
Yes.
in locations? Wouldn't that take care of some of that problem?
Yes, it would, if people use the ballot boxes to drop them off, which is exactly why we're going to have them. But of course, yes, it would be better than dropping it in the mailbox, because the mailbox, it goes to Westchester and comes back again. Exactly right. So I'm hoping we can encourage people, and you could help me at the local level by letting people know that this ballot box is there and it should be used for a quicker drop off of your ballot. But I'm also worried about just receiving the ballots. Fortunately, we have this mail house that's going to be doing the mailing, so we will be able to track where those ballots are for the first time. A lot of states have ballot tracking systems that have been in place for years. But I don't know about you, but I get this thing from the US Postal Service every day that says, oh, here's the mail that's coming today, and here's the FedEx packages that are going to arrive. We should have all that technology available to us as well for the most important function of government. So I hope we're moving in that direction, but thank you for bringing that up. It would be very helpful if the League could help us identify that as a resource for people.
Well, Denise, we love a cause. We're happy to take up a cause.
Good.
So now you've given us marching orders. We will be working on this ballot problem.
Yes, absolutely. Anything you can do to help with the public information, because I know people are terribly confused. There's so much national news right now about all this, and they don't really understand exactly where we are with some of this. We'll try our best to get the info out, but you at the local level can do the most to help me with that.
So as I'm stepping off as president, our new communications person, Nicole Klein, will be happy to do a flyer that we will post on social media all throughout Westport.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I'll be happy to
drawn it up.
I'll be happy
Here it
to edit it in my free time between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. on a Sunday.
Right. And be sure you send us a copy. I'd love to see anything you guys are doing.
We will. Right, Nicole?
Thanks, Esther. Wonderful.
Says me, who's now no longer the president.
Yeah, right. Easy.
Denise,
other
what's your best guess on when this special session will actually happen?
As of yesterday, I'm told second or third week of July.
That's so late.
Well, like I say, we will be mailing the applications out. And so beyond that,
Okay, so yeah, and you've got the mailing house, so,
yes.
okay.
So Denise, just to clarify, you'll be mailing out the absentee ballots for the primary.
Not ballots, applications.
Sorry, applications. We will
Right.
fill out the application to get a ballot for August. There's no exceptions this time because of the pandemic. Anyone can vote, choose to vote via ballot for the primary.
Correct.
It's the general election that we have nothing decided on yet.
That's true.
Okay.
Although I did do an opinion about the definition of illness, which does clarify it. And if you'd like, you should look at it. It's on the website.
Yep, we will. Nicole and I will go there.
All right, great.
Well, I always learn a lot at our meetings, and I've certainly learned a lot at this one. We have one more question, and we will call it a night.
Actually, Jonathan Steinberg is confirming that the special session for the second or third week in July.
Oh, there you go.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you,
From
Jonathan.
the horse's mouth.
Yes.
Yes.
Any
And
other questions?
Just like to say thank you very much.
And I'd like to say thank you to Becky and Celeste for setting up the entire Zoom call, inviting Denise and coordinating everything for us tonight. Thank you for the great job.
well,
Great job.
Thank you so
thank
much
you, everybody.
for having me.
No.
And thanks to the league for all your years of support and work on these things. It's never been more important.
Thank you,
Thank
Denise, for
you.
joining us. Take care.
All right, bye now.
Bye-bye. Good night, everyone. Take care.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
God bless. Thank you.
Thank you.